Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. My name is Huzaifah. I'm a postgraduate student from Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying in University Technology Malaysia. Today, I would like to present a research on the topic of the development of the Malaysian Strata Lease Scheme, a conceptual framework study. The research aim will be to design a conceptual framework for a research study on the development of strata lease scheme in Malaysia. The method approach will be designing a framework using library research or literature review research as the methodology. Let me explain a little bit on the introduction of this research. This research is meant to design a conceptual framework for a strata lease scheme development research projects. But in order to do that, the Malaysian law that regulates the development of strata lease scheme need to be reviewed through a literature review, through a law review, to understand the conceptual framework that is to be designed in that research. For example, examining these laws to understand the requirement of strata lease scheme development. From this law, we are trying to establish the principles under the land development, under land registration, the subdivision buildings, strata title registration, strata entities, processes, and its legal requirement. From this principle, we are able to identify the elements that is needed to design a good conceptual framework. I would like to explain on the method how we design a conceptual framework. First, we need to do a literature review on the topic of the research relating to the law of the development principle under strata lease scheme development. Next, we need to organize this principle that we have determined from the literature review of strata lease scheme development and present it into a table form. Next, we are going to tabulate the data from the table and draw a form of flows to see that whether these conceptual framework are able to design from this principle. A literature review helps to identify the topics relating to strata lease scheme development. For example, in this picture, you can see that we have tabulated the information that were discussed during our literature review session. So from this, we are able to identify the principles under strata lease scheme development. For example, principle number 1 is the land development, principle number 2 is the land registration, principle number 3 is the land lease, principle 4 is the strata scheme entity, principle 5 is development processes, principle 6 is strata leasing, principle 7 is the features of strata lease scheme, and principle number 8 is the legislation requirement. These principles are the elements are required to design a conceptual framework for a study. When designing a conceptual framework, you need to lay out the information and to put it in a picture form. For example, in this slide, we can see that there is a relationship between each principle to show there is a movement how a strata lease scheme is formed. For example, it begins with land development, and there is, of course, under the land development, there is a disposal of land through land alienation, and from there, when we have a land title, a subdivision of building takes place when the building development is completed, the issuance of title on each of the parcel, where we call it strata title. When we have a strata title, we need to register the lease. Registration falls under land registration, where land registration is actually adopting land leasing concept under National Land Code to register the lease onto strata title. Registering a lease onto strata title, it called the next principle, calling it as strata title leasing. From this, strata title leasing combining with the strata entity, which is the building of strata itself, forming strata lease scheme. However, it will not be complete of a strata lease scheme concept without putting in the development process of strata lease scheme developments and also the legislation required under strata lease scheme development. We need to know also the features that distinguish a strata lease scheme and the normal strata lease. Throughout the study of strata lease scheme development, some new elements will be identified that contributes to the research. For example, In this case, with 5 elements are found during the research course. For example, the new elements are the strata lease scheme development process flow, the legislation specifically for strata lease scheme, the characteristic of strata lease scheme, the development features of a strata lease scheme, and the overall concept of strata lease scheme. These elements are known as the new knowledge discovered in the research. Before we come to an end, I would like to express that a conceptual framework is very important in any kind of research. Designing a conceptual framework is necessary to identify what is our research intention. It is used as a guide in every research process. In this study, the finding reveals that a conceptual framework for a strata lease scheme development is actually construed or formed from a range of principles that is derived from the Malaysian law. In this study, we discovered that 9 principles which is required to design our conceptual framework. This conceptual framework will offer a practical guide in implementing this principle, and it helps the researcher to identify the overall conceptual of a strata lease scheme development. I would like to convey my gratitude to the audience for listening to my presentation. Thank you.